Welcome to Beyond Distribution with GTDC podcast. Today's episode was recorded during our North America Vendor Summit event, which took place in Oceanside in February. In this panel discussion with Frank Vitagliano, the group touches on a number of critical channel topics, including upstream and downstream advances with AI, collaboration opportunities with hyperscalers, and discuss the challenges of the current global environment. Today's panelists are Sean Kerins, President and CEO of Aero Electronics, Dan Schwab, Co-President of D&H, Paul Bay, CEO of Ingram Micro, and Patrick Zammit, CEO of TD Synnex. Check out this special episode of Beyond Distribution with GTDC to hear their answers. Thanks for listening.
We've heard a lot today, right? Obviously, we got a lot of interesting discussion from Doug. I hate to admit this, but I've never seen him so shaky. I've seen Doug, present 2 times a year. Typically, I speak to him, once or twice a year, and he's a little flustered right now with everything that's going on, which scares me a little bit. And then, of course, the information that Crawford always provides in terms of, IDC's view on the market, which is good because it's coming right from CIOs, right? And, at the end of the day, that makes sense. So there's been a lot here. We'll cover some of that ground. So Dan, let me start with you. A lot of discussion. The IT marketplace, last year at a, higher level in terms of taking everything into account, grew pretty significantly. But I think most folks would agree that the endpoint device market didn't grow as much as we all anticipated it would, right? What's your view on that, and what's your view looking forward as, into, 2025 and beyond?
Well, I think last year started with kind of the post-COVID, things slowed down, and we all thought 2024 was going to pick up, and people looked into that crystal ball and said the second half of the year should start picking up. I think we've really seen that 2024, especially the first 3 or so quarters, were challenging, but we've actually seen that start to turn the corner. That we believe this year it's kind of a rolling thunder. They showed the migration to Windows 11. We are very bullish. We've started to see double-digit increases week over week versus last year for 7 weeks now. So we're starting to see that demand pick up. Whether it's small businesses, mid-sized enterprises, we're starting to see that because the large enterprises, the CIOs, Fortune 1000 companies, they've known about Windows 11 for a long time. They've talked about how they're going to leverage Copilot. The bulk of businesses around North America have learned about that more recently, and they're beginning the integration. And each one of them is different. So we see this year to be an upgrade cycle that I don't think we've seen since whether it's Win 98 or those big macro cycles that we used to see before. So we see it's not upgrading part of their environment. They're looking at it because of the AI PC and Copilot. This is really the opportunity to future-proof, because a lot of those small and mid-sized companies, they talked about the small data sets, and it's very hard to bring it down to small-sized businesses. The Walmarts of the world have been doing machine learning and AI for a long time. But they're future-proofing, and they're looking at upgrading their entire device portfolio, and it's forcing them to take a step back, whether it's looking at their network, looking at their back office. So we see this as an opportunity to help our partners have very deep conversations with their end users about not just the endpoint devices, but what it means to the entire environment.
Yeah. The way we like to do these panel, the way I like to do it, is obviously ask a different question to everybody so we don't get, as he said and as he said. But if anybody wants to comment on any of the questions, just feel free to jump in and do that. Paul, let me jump over to you now. And one of the things that obviously is a major factor running a global business is all of the things that are happening in the world today, right? And listening to Doug talk about things happening every day, and how do you plan for that? I mean, how are you thinking about that as it relates to the impact on your business, the impact on supply chains, the impact with tariffs? What are you thinking, and what are you talking to your board about?
Well, I'm glad Crawford went second, because after Doug went, I was a little bit doom and gloom. So I feel better about the overall technology industry and where we're going. So, as it relates to tariffs, you heard it's fluid. We don't know. I think it's unknown now. You look at deregulation and what's supposed to happen and the idea behind that to spur economic growth. But I know some of the vendor partners in the room, they were preparing for some of this stuff almost a year ago, as they were potentially looking at change in administration, potential tariffs, of what happened the last go around. So kind of moving those pieces around. I think really what it comes down to, we're going to pass that through. So distribution sitting in the middle of it, we're going to pass that through. I think the real question we have, is there a peak because there's inventory in the channel? Some of that stuff from a cost average perspective will work its way through. But what's the water? Where's the water going to settle? And I think that's still the unknown aspect that we had. So we're all planning of where we are depending on what countries you're operating in. But at the end of the day, the real question is going to be, what's the end consumption, those end businesses that our solution providers are servicing, the millions of end businesses, what's their price elasticity and their willingness to pay more for something that was 10, 15, 20, 25% less just 2 months ago. And so I think that's really going to be the challenge that we're going to have to see, which is that going to put a little speed bump? Again, you're going to maybe have an uptick because of what's there from an inventory, global inventory, supply chain systems today, and the buildup of anticipation, and then what's going to happen when it finally hits the watermark, and how much of it is negotiation and what's going to be real. The answer is there's going to be something, is our belief, but to what extent, I think we don't know, and it's still a little bit fluid right now.
Yeah, I mean, the scary part is, and Crawford mentioned this, the economy, particularly in the U.S., has been pretty resilient for the last couple of years. And so, you know, a lot of those types of things would get buffered, but this could be a different scenario, and it could be a different scenario very quickly. Sean, when I look at Arrow, obviously you have the, oh, go ahead, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just one additional thought about tariffs specifically, because I guess fortunately or unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience with this since, you know, the first tariffs were imposed on the Chinese, what, now 6 years ago? And we're doing all the same things that Paul talked about. Obviously, your only posture can be to pass these on as best as possible. But I think as a general plug for not just us, but distribution in general, if you think about, you know, a company that has a global supply chain, a global warehousing and logistics network, you realize that a lot of big suppliers and OEMs are all trying to figure out how to navigate what these tariffs will mean for their supply chain. We're actually in a great position to help them do that, because if they want to move manufacturing from China to another part of Southeast Asia or to Mexico or you name it, we've got assets throughout the world to help make that a little bit easier for them to pull that off. Now, Paul's right. Until the dust settles, none of us are going to know exactly where they want to go, but you can expect that there will be a whole lot of movement, and we want to be able to help them capitalize.
Yeah, so your business is obviously a little different in terms of, you know, Arrow's got the traditional ECS business, but you've also got a very big components business, right? And so, you know, as you talk to your customers and as you're thinking about, you know, what are you hearing from them, you know, at this point relative to both the ECS space and the components space?
Well, I think I'm living and breathing in the tale of two cities these days.
You're in ours today.
Frank, yeah. So for those of you that don't know a whole lot about Arrow, we have two well-established businesses. One is in enterprise IT, the space that we all know and love. And in that business, we obviously enable a pretty big channel of solution providers throughout the world to help go serve their customers. And on the other side of the house, you know, we not just enable the channel in electronic components, we are the channel. So we are very close to, you know, OEMs and customers that design components into their products, you know, for production runs that hopefully last years. And so we get really good visibility to what's happening in that piece of the market. And in that piece of the market, it's been a tough couple, 3 years. I think you've got, you know, some big transitions underway. The first is, you know, there was a massive disconnect between supply and demand that emerged during the depths of the pandemic, and we're still suffering from all the excess inventory that led to as a result, and it's been a big headwind to demand signals in markets like the industrial mass market, where we have a whole lot of exposure. We hope we're getting to the end of that cycle, and as inventories reach more normal levels, we'll see better demand again, but it's been a rough ride. But the other big, you know, sort of transition that the semiconductor industry is undergoing is just a massive overweight of spend to all things artificial intelligence. And what it's done is, at least temporarily, it's created this world of haves and have-nots. So if you're in the GPU space or the memory space or the interconnect market, you're probably doing okay. But if you're just about everywhere else, Many other things have been deprioritized for now. I think some of the balance will come back to that piece of the market as well, and we certainly look forward to it. But, tale of two cities, I'm equally encouraged by, what's happening in our enterprise IT business, partly for the reasons that Crawford laid out. I mean, it is a less cyclical business, much more resilient, and I think that's because IT has always been a source of economic productivity, and it will continue to be so for years to come. We've also been doing a lot of work to sort of position ourselves for the more significant demand trends that Crawford talked about, be it cloud, hybrid cloud, infrastructure software, including cybersecurity. The list is long, but increasingly it's about as a service, and we're finding that if you can get yourself squarely in that space and help the channel execute on as a service, the demand trends are pretty good. And I do agree that it's a little too early, but I think traditional data centers are starting to kind of rethink what the future is going to require as well, and that's renewing some of our traditional on-premise activity as well. So I think the outlook for that piece of the business is better this year, but I think we're, if you think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of OEMs in the world for electronic components, I think there's still some rough sledding ahead.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we obviously spend a lot of time talking about AI and what's coming and how it's going to happen. But, similar to cloud, maybe 10, 15 years ago, it took a long time to figure out how that was going to get monetized, right? Beyond in the case today, from an AI standpoint, certainly the NVIDIAs of the world are figuring out how to monetize it, but not everybody else is yet. So Patrick, one of the things that, I would ask you is, as you look at enabling your customers, right, to really take advantage of this going forward, what are some of the things that the distributors, could be doing, should be doing to do that?
Just jumping on the monetization side, at the moment it's very clear that the ones who are benefiting from it is the ones who are serving the hyperscalers.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it's not distribution or not the channel for the moment.
Right.
So in our case, we're going to see an acceleration of the monetization when really the enterprises are going to adopt the technology. And we know, we've discussed it several times this morning, companies in general are trying to find the right use cases, justify the return on investment. And that means that our channel partners, they need to learn how to position technologies, applications, agents in front of their end users, and not only the CIOs, but also the line of businesses.
Great.
So we see that AI is a major opportunity. It's going to impact basically all the technologies we take to market. But at the same time, we need to help all our channel partners to build their practices and or upgrade their practices, especially on the infrastructure side, so that they position the technology properly. So what we are doing, we've launched a specific enablement program. We call it Destination AI. It's going to apply to all the technologies which are impacted by AI. It's going to be investing in pre-sales. It's going to be investing in education, in certification, and then already in some resources to help some of the resellers who are going in front of their end users to, educate the end users, win some deals, or at least work on some proof of concept. And then we'll have to think about the services we need to bring.
Sure.
So we are really in this enablement phase, and I'm sure the monetization is going to come.
Yep.
It's a little bit like AIPC. When is it going to really materialize? But I think the investment has to be done now, and we are all well positioned to make those investments up front to support the channel.
Hey,
Yeah.
Frank, one thing I was going to add on that. I think there's analogies to cloud that it was talked about, as they said earlier, there was more ink than revenue. I think this is really a dichotomy to that, because when cloud came out, none of us were necessarily utilizing it right away. Now we've all seen it on different apps. And in fact, now that you've got Copilot, I view that as very horizontal. Everyone can see the power of it, right? Very easy to summarize a Teams call, to go through all my emails and write a review for someone on my team by looking at all those things are great, but they're very horizontal. So I think people have already started to see the power. I think what needs to happen within the distributors and our partners that we're focusing on is training them on vertical applications, not vertical per se by industry, but by function within a company. So the finance function, the HR function, the credit, where do they extract value? And it depends on each company because everyone's different. So if you have 150 people in an accounts payable role, it's very different than if you have 9. So we've spent a lot of time. I think last year we've now trained 2,600 partners on AI on how to talk to the end users and talk to them about their data to start figuring out where the opportunities are to run their business, take costs out of their business, from 6 to 20 hours of training to help them because the end users don't understand it yet. So that's the biggest gap of monetizing this. I think the enterprise guys know it very well. So I think that's the role of the channel is to take our great vendor technologies. The vendors have a lot of use cases now and continue to drive those to help enable our partners.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different point of view, but it's adjacent to what the two have already said. So if you look at it, you're going from the compute layer and what we're doing from an enterprise perspective. How's it going to get down to the application layer? Every SMB and or mid-market is saying, I want it, but I don't know what I want. Help me understand that. So that goes back to the training, the enablement, the pieces that is on us to be able to do. But if you take a step back and look at all the vendor partners in the room, on average, call it 6 products make up an average deployment. That's for us on a global basis. 6 different products on one invoice. Every one of you are developing and embedding some type of AI capability. The opportunity we have from a distribution perspective is to be able to take all that together and help our customers, some of which we're sitting up here, so they can have a business outcome, whatever the use case is from an end user perspective. So I think the opportunity for us is how you get out in front of it and provide us the information of what that is, because all of you going individually to say, here's my use case for this, when you're only one piece of the entire solution. The opportunity we have is how do we bring that together and streamline that so we understand those, in my example, those 6 different vendor solutions that are coming together for one business outcome. And that's been a challenge for this industry. I think collaboration, one of the things I always ask for all of you is understand you're one piece more often than not, you're just one piece of the solution. We got to continue to reach across the aisles to know how do we bring that together. I think we're getting better as an ecosystem, but it's taken a long time to get to where we are. We got to accelerate that, especially in the time of AI, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because if you remember Crawford, he said, if you remember one thing from my presentation, it's integration of the solution is the biggest factor, right? And who could do that better than the companies that you 4 are running, right?
Well, I think the exciting thing for us is that for the first time we have a technology that can really help the channel sell in new and creative ways that we couldn't have imagined even just a few short years ago. So if you think about embedding AI in the selling process so that partners are smarter about where to sell, what use case to capitalize on, where budgets are being deployed, I think AI is going to supercharge enablement. And so when we talk about enablement, historically it's about training and it's about door-to-door selling and it's about all the things that we've all become very good at over the years, but now we got to figure out how to automate that at a lot more scale, and I think you can only do that if you can embed AI in a digital experience that the channel can take advantage of.
Yep. So, Dan, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the skills shortage, right? Obviously, education and training is a big part of that, but what are some of the things that you think distributors can do to help with the skill shortage across the industry? Because it's not just at your customer level, there's skill shortages everywhere within the ecosystem. Again, the ecosystem consists of your customers in some cases, but also some of your partners, right? What are some of the things you think distributors can do or are doing?
We have to do our best to supplement and scale their resources. So let's talk about cybersecurity. They can only hire and train so many people, and then someone comes along and maybe we'll pay them a little bit more. But it's critical that if they're a managed security service provider, they need to have that talent pool. Because of that, we spend a lot of time training our partners, doing certifications, leveraging our vendors' capabilities to train them. So that's a big part of what we do. It doesn't help us sell anything that day, but that's the investment we make to really migrate and move the channel to where the puck's going and help them be successful. What we do our best to try and do is augment them, never replace what they do. But we have, like for DNH, everyone I'm sure has it, we have an A methodology where we assess, we help implement and manage. And we can do any of those. We can help them assess the environment for them. We can actually do the implementation, get a third party. If they manage it, great. If they want to use our platform, our X as a service, which we think is great, and they can layer in their own services. So our job is to figure out how we help them. And talent is going to continue to be a challenge. I think some of the AI will help support that, but you're never going to catch up. So you have to leverage your vendor partners and the entire ecosystem to be successful. We also, at the same time, we just like training good talent. So if we've got great people, we'll train them. And we know the greatest and highest use of them is training our partners. First, train our people, make sure they're as fluent and experts as they can be, and then let's magnify that out to our partner base.
So one of the areas that clearly you all are making, major investments in are platforms, and to really get to the point where you can make digital distribution real, you have to have a cloud, based powered platform, right? So there's been a lot of conversation about it, a lot of discussion. Obviously, Paul, it's been evolving now for a number of years. But based on your experiences, what are you hearing from your customers in terms of what's working, and also a little bit of, hey, here's some additional things that we could take advantage of that we need, distributors to provide going forward?
So I could spend the rest of the time that we have up here talking about, but I won't.
You can't do that.
I'll try and simplify it as best as possible. So you heard it on stage prior and in some of the other panels that were up here, which is the complexity of this industry. How that business outcome is provided, there's multiple different ways to go. It's not just point A to point B, plug this in, and this is the solution. We'll sell a warranty and we'll be back in a couple of years to give you better, faster, quicker, and lower TCO. So this is about the complexity. And so we look at it as how do we become, and we talk about like, what do we want to be? I think the distribution terminology is tough. It's table stakes. We talked about it at dinner last night amongst many of us. We've talked about the orchestrating. For us, it's pretty simple. We want to be the leading B2B platform on a global basis. And so what does that mean? That's great. We can use all the buzzwords. It's how do you take supply and demand and make it as touchless as possible and using the data ultimately with it. And supply is just not physical supply. It's hardware, it's software, it's all of the pieces, it's cloud that's put together. So I think there's really a 3-phase kind of opportunity as you migrate up as an industry of where we're at. That first one's about driving productivity. How do you take the friction out of everything we're doing? The time and effort this panel takes on behalf of the end user through our solution, I'll use solution provider generically, through all of you as our vendor partners. It's millions of phone calls, it's emails. Go back to my on average of 6 different orders. Where's my order status? When's it going to arrive? What's the right pricing? I got a special pricing area. Sending emails, take this email, turn it into an order. That's all inbound, reactive, as opposed to turning to be proactive on the outbound. So that's kind of that first phase. And again, you just heard it on the last panel of how do you take things that used to take hours and days? We got to go to the vendor, go get the special price, comes back to us. We go to the customer goes, decides if we're going to go to the end user with it, and then do that 6 times over. That's taking days, hours and days. Now being able to take that by using AI as a company and or an industry and bring that together and make it as seamless as possible. That's a great experience from an end user, gives a competitive advantage for our solution providers to go out and deliver that. So that, I would call that kind of around the friction or productivity. The second level is really then how do you turn that to go to market? Because now you're freeing up back-end conversations, reskilling, retraining, whichever words you want to use, and taking people from the inbound and turning them to the outbound to start helping our partners and all of us from a distribution standpoint become better business partners ultimately out to that end user. So those are things like providing recommendations. Hey, somebody that called on this end user similar to you in a similar technology brought these together. They're also adding this warranty. They're also adding this. That's all touchless. That's not being reactive to say, what else am I missing? Because you heard him say, what's the competition doing? I can't keep up with the speed. There's so much complexity. You heard that all day long in this panel for the last 4 hours. And then the last one is kind of utopia, and ultimately what all companies want to have is, for us, how do you want to run your business using data and the insights? Because if you can take care of those first 2 pieces of it, you've freed up so much time to have a different business conversation as opposed to all the things you've done to get there. It looks really good on PowerPoint, sounds really good, but trying to do it in a $1 trillion+ industry with all the different moving parts is challenging. But that's what the partners ultimately want up here.
Yeah.
They want to understand so they can go service their end business, the millions of end businesses, and make it as seamless as possible and be a true business partners.
So what has clearly resulted from some of that, and Sean, I'll go to you now to ask, if you look at that, obviously distribution has evolved, right? And it's gone from where it was to where it is today, and clearly where it's going is even to provide more robust set of services
Yeah.
for your customers, right? And it's things that a lot of us probably wouldn't even thought of 4 or 5 years ago, but now you're in there and you're having to do it and you're having to develop them, and it's an interesting transition. What are some of the things that you're thinking about as you and your team implement those?
Well, you know, Frank asked us last night if there was a better word for distribution. I heard you mention this morning, you know, we're still thinking about what that looks like. I do like the word orchestration. I think it's, it may not be perfect, but it's more representative of what many of us are up to these days. And, you know, we have been on this journey to what I would call IT as a service now for several years. So if I go back, I don't know, our CFO's in the room, she'll probably tell me not to say this, but if I go back far enough, you know, the mix of our business was probably just 1/3 software and related services. Today it's 75% software, managed services, et cetera. More and more of that is recurring, which is all good news. And it doesn't mean that we've run from hardware, because hardware is still a very necessary piece of a hybrid cloud solution. We all know that. But it means increasingly that infrastructure is being delivered as a service, right? So we've learned a lot along the way, and I would just build upon, you know, Paul's use of the word, you know, complexity. I think the big fallacy about the journey to the cloud is that it was supposed to be simple. Well, it's been anything but, and in fact, it's still, and I think for some time will be incredibly challenging and incredibly complicated, but where you see a complicated journey for a customer to undertake, we all have an opportunity to help them navigate that journey. So I think the way you have to do that, though, it means that, you know, the digital experiences that make that possible are going to have to become increasingly capable and sophisticated. So you will see us continue to invest at greater rates in what that digital experience looks like versus what the traditional selling and support model used to require. You know, we've already kind of started that, but I can see that accelerating even further in the future, because digital will be the de facto go-to-market experience, I think, especially as the ecosystem gets more and more complicated. And kind of our vision for this is this virtuous flywheel, that as the indirect ecosystem increasingly is digitally engaged, we're all going to have an even greater opportunity to sell more products, solutions, and managed services. And as and when that happens, you'll create more and more digital engagement and so on. So I think it becomes this opportunity and this selling motion that will build upon itself for years to come. And that leads us to be able to envision a world where we serve our suppliers and customers in some pretty non-traditional ways. Because the traditional hierarchical two-tier motion, I think, is going to look very different in the years to come.
Yeah, and it forces the, you know, we've talked about this before, but the number one thing none of you want to hear from any of your customers is, I didn't know you did that, right? And it forces, hopefully, that from not happening, right? But it's very easy for that to happen, because some of the services that are being created are really things that, you know, haven't been there before, are clearly necessary in the marketplace, but you all have to do a good job, and I've got to do a good job of educating people on what's out there in order for them to, you know, make sure they understand it and utilize them, right? Okay, Patrick, one of the things that, you know, we've continued to talk about, started 4 or 5 years ago, and it's continued, is hyperscalers and the role of hyperscalers, you know, in our space. And for, you know, in the beginning of the discussion 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was, oh, where is this going? How is this going to work? You know, is this going to be a scenario where, you know, distribution gets impacted significantly, et cetera? My sense is it hasn't quite played out that way. My sense is it's played out differently, but you certainly are very close to it. What's your view on kind of how it's played out and the sort of the co-opetition that, you know, we're seeing?
So I'm going to focus, my answer is going to be focused on the hyperscalers marketplaces. I guess that's where you are heading to. And it's true that it's very interesting. It's a little bit like cloud many years ago. I mean, when I discuss with some of our partners, they are telling me, oh, this is another disintermediation initiative, and that's going to be bad for the channels or for the distributors. But the fact is, it is becoming a huge go-to-market. I mean, tens of billions, and the reality is that the end users, if they have credits they have to utilize, they will utilize it from the marketplaces, because the CFOs will not allow them to spend it with their traditional resellers. So So we see it as a go-to-market, a new go-to-market, which we need to embrace. And fortunately, I mean, what we see, and we have a lot of discussions, a lot of lobbying from our side, but also coming from other vendors, by the way, many of you in the room, is those hyperscalers are facilitating models so that even if the end user is now buying from their marketplace, the channel can be rewarded. Okay? So, I mean, AWS is quite ahead with the DSO model, but everybody's working on it. And so that's good news because it's recognizing that, again, the channel is absolutely critical so that end users adopt the technology. If the channel is not rewarded, products will not be taken to market. So that's so the first point is, I mean, it's not. So that's the reason I don't see it as competition. As really, I see it more and more as a collaboration to make sure that the channel is rewarded. The second dimension is that there's an opportunity for us to interface or connect their marketplaces with our marketplaces. Because as all of us talked about it today, I mean, automation is going to be critical.
Sure.
Okay? And in fact, again, what we see is that the hyperscalers are absolutely open to that and, in fact, facilitating it. So, again, in summary, I don't see it as a disintermediation risk. I see it more as an opportunity, a new go-to-market we need to embrace. And for us, it's the opportunity to provide some new services for the resellers, making sure that the products from the vendor community continue to be pushed by the reseller.
Yeah, I mean, we heard earlier from the reseller panel when they talked about, you know, you guys being able to, distributors being able to provide better training on some of their programs than they're providing, which I thought was pretty interesting. Of course, that's probably been the case for years in the vendor community, although I hate to admit it, because I was there for a long time, developing the programs that nobody could explain. I'm going to violate my rule. I'm going to ask the same question of the four of you to kind of end with. And that is, you know, if you had to ask one thing from this group, right? Because we've got about 50 suppliers, you know, in the room, different companies, and probably, you know, another 2 or 3 people per company. So there's, you know, 100 people in the room that are working in the supplier community. If you had asked one thing of them in terms of, you know, what would the ask be?
I'll make it simple. I think I already asked for it. We got to continue to lean in and work across all of your companies. Let us in earlier. All of you know us very, very well. It's like an old family reunion. That's one of the things I give Frank, by the way, a hard time of. We need not the family reunion, we need the other pieces of the puzzle to come together. Because the value of what you've just heard, if we got to sit in front of your ELT at the senior most level, whichever size your vendor is, I think they would have learned something today in this 4 hours to be able to want to lean into. Let us go have the conversation on your behalf. Bring us in, because that's going to help you and us, I think, create a better outcome. We're all going to sell more, we're going to do more, and it'll be better for the ecosystem. So let us in early and bring us all in so we can have a different conversation than you're just the distribution, here's your dollars, go after that, and then we all say, how can we get our unfair share? It should be way broader than that, and it'll accelerate more quickly if we do that together.
Yeah.
I'll make it simple. Make it your goal to be easier to do business with. And it's a little bit of tough love because our vendor partners have rebate programs where we buy something for $10,000 and there's a $2,000 rebate and we have to then chase it back with the manufacturers for our funding, and there's audits going back. There's a whole army of people within most companies that are managing all these ship and debits. Same thing with programs. Many times programs are rolled out with not maybe the full understanding of the whiplash it creates downstream and how long it takes to train partners, to embrace it, to lever that investment you're making. So our biggest thing is that include us in those conversations and the strategy. Don't let teams do it on their own, because I do think it's the course of least resistance, that if you make things harder and harder, getting rid of that friction, speed to price, easier to do business with in today's world, oftentimes is the tiebreaker.
And by the way, that theme, right, Sean, I'll go to you in 1 minute, but that theme came out big time yesterday in the finance forum that we did. So you know, your CFO, your CFO, your CFO, or talking to the vendor finance people, and you know, and all have a vested interest in the programs, right?
Very healthy.
Yeah, and that theme came out big time. And actually, I think we made some progress because I think there was recognition on both sides of, yeah, we got to do it. Now, how can we do it? How can we work together? And we're getting the right people to talk to each other, right?
Right.
Sean?
Here I thought we were going to all say the same thing, but I guess it's going to be a little bit different for each of us. Patrick, too bad that you're last.
I'm in the wrong seat.
Right.
You know, as a distributor, we sometimes use the word vendor or supplier, but I actually think of our suppliers as our customers. And we appreciate, you know, the ability to represent you in the market. We have to earn that right every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year. But in saying that, you know, recognize that, you know, you put us in business, right? You determine the playing field. You set the rules of engagement. You show us how and where to make money. And all I would ask is, be as consistent, as predictable as possible. As consistent and as predictable as possible. When you are predictable, we want to invest because we know that there's a return over the horizon. When you're not consistent, when you're not predictable, we got to go find somebody else who is. So that would be my ask.
I'm lucky.
Nothing left.
You get to wrap it all up.
No, fortunately. So, yeah. So for me, especially, so I mean, we're all the same. We got annual targets. I do the same with the team. But we talked about AI and the fact that we're in this enablement phase. And so my ask is, as we develop our growth and investment plans together, let's not look only at the next year, but here probably the horizon is 2 to 3 years. Because again, back to the monetization issue, AI is one example. There are other technologies which are emerging. 1 year is too short. And we won't, I mean, if you think about, I mean, we need to co-invest. I know that your CFOs are putting you under a lot of pressure to get a fast return. But in those cases, monetization is going to happen a little bit later. And so thinking 2 to 3 years in those cases is going to be much more powerful and impactful over the time.
Well, so just so that you have a perspective here, sitting on this panel from a global revenue standpoint, the revenue is probably very close to $150 billion of global revenue that these four companies represent on a global basis. So there's a lot happening here. A big chunk of it's North America, but also some of it's global. So let me thank you not only for participating in the panel, but for also your participation over the last day and a half, where you guys have made yourself available and you've had, I know, a number of meetings, and we appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah,
Thanks everybody.